We'll go live in about a minute, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EFC webinar on how your church can help sponsor refugees. We're really glad you're here. My name is Karen Stiller, and I'm an editor with Faith Today magazine. Today we're going to be discussing a topic that is top of mind for all Canadians, I'm sure, and particularly the church. We're in the world's worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. Every day when I pick up my newspaper, it is filled with stories about the Canadian government's response to the Syrian refugee crisis. And we know that from coast to coast, Canadian churches are mobilizing to help with this issue. And the church has always been at the forefront of the refugee movement. So today is no different, and maybe more than ever. So we're hoping that this time will be a good time for you to get information that will help you in your response and help you sort out some of the issues. We're joined today by 3 experts who all have different kinds of experience on the refugee issue. So what's going to happen is I'm going to, in a moment, ask them to introduce themselves and share with you how they are an expert in this issue. And then I will ask some questions, and then we encourage you to ask your questions. This is really a great chance for you to interact directly with folks with really good practical knowledge. So that's how the webinar will run, and it will be recorded and archived for future use. So hopefully it will be so helpful to you that you're going to want to show it at your church or something and just have everyone be able to be better informed. So let's begin, and Anita, over to you.
Hi, I'm really glad that everyone is able to be with us today. It is wonderful that there's so much interest in this, particularly as we prepare other churches to be part of this. My name is Anita Levesque. I'm the coordinator of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada's Middle East Refugee Resettlement Initiative, and I work together with VP of Ministry Services Aileen Van Ginkel and Doug Ward, who's sitting next to me. And together we facilitate discussions with government leaders, citizenship and immigration department representatives, and denominational sponsorship agreement holders.
And my name is Doug Ward. I'm a pastor here in Ottawa and have been here for about 30 years. And because of that, sometimes you tend to get involved with political issues, being in Ottawa and having some interest in it. So that has drawn me close to many issues that captivate our country. I'd be a reluctant participant. Our church really grappled with the refugee issue, very interested to really search it out. And about a year ago, I started talking to politicians here in Ottawa and others who were involved in it, and I think it was sealed really by April and being.
Okay, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. So Doug, we're going to ask you to.
I was really convicted. So we as a church and me as an individual have been involved with further efforts in this area, and I'm working alongside EFC to kind of get churches across the country involved.
Very
Hi.
good, Deborah.
I'm Deborah Feguth. I am chair of the Anglican Diocese of Ontario Refugee Support, or DOORS. It's our little refugee committee. I have been involved in private sponsorship of refugees for about 12 years, and we have worked with people coming from Congo, Myanmar, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. In the last 3 months, that has increased exponentially with so many people wanting to get involved with Syrian sponsorship especially. So it's been a steep learning curve just trying to coordinate a lot of people, but it's wonderful to see the response. Just a note about a sponsorship agreement holder, as our diocese is, there are, I think, 96 sponsorship agreement holders across the country, so we're one of those.
And so 96 sponsorship agreement holders only in your denomination, but there's hundreds, correct?
No. There are 96 organizations, including denominations, that have agreements with the federal government.
Got it. All right, Deborah, I'm going to begin with you as someone who's really in sort of the trenches, so to speak, with churches. Are you seeing a lot of churches come forward who haven't been involved before, but they're sort of, I don't know, excited is not the right word, but moved by this?
Yeah, there are lots of churches. I've been talking about refugees for years, and suddenly there's this awakening, and people are discovering that there are refugees in the world, and not just Syrian refugees. It's interesting to see that people who have never heard of Eritrea are now sponsoring refugees from Eritrea who have been sitting there in Sudan for 20 years in a so-called temporary situation. So lots and lots of churches, not just Anglican, but other churches in our community and far beyond, are interested now in sponsoring.
Okay, and I will say Deborah is also a writer for Faith Today magazine, the publication of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. In our most recent issue, November, December, Deborah wrote a really concise how-to piece for churches who may want to be involved in sponsoring refugees. So Deborah, in a nutshell, just walk us through like the sort of 3 or 4 steps that a church would take to be involved in this.
I think, first of all, because we're talking about the Syrian crisis mostly, I think it's important for people to educate themselves about what is happening in Syria, because it is a really complicated situation, and it's been going on for a long time, almost 5 years. So I think education first. And then if you are in a church, find out if your denomination is a sponsorship agreement holder with the federal government, because if it is, that makes it a lot easier to undertake a sponsorship. So you can do that within your church, or if you want to get together with other churches, if you have a small church, and form a group, a sponsoring group, which is formally called a constituent group, and work through your denomination to sponsor a family. Then you want to know what family you can sponsor. So there are 2 ways of doing that. One is through a government program called the Blended Visa Office Referred Program, BVOR, and that is a program where the government has already screened refugees overseas and has families available to sponsor. And the nice thing about that is, well, 2 nice things. One is that they come more quickly than if it's a full sponsorship. The other thing is that the government kicks in 6 months of financial support, and the constituent group is responsible for raising the funds for the other 6 months. And that if you're with a church, that all those donations are tax receivable. The second way of sponsoring is if you know a family member or someone with connections overseas who has family or friends or someone who has fled Syria, either to Lebanon or Jordan or Turkey, and that person or family needs sponsoring, then you can do a full private sponsorship. In the past, some of those sponsorships have taken years to complete, but with the Syrian families, refugees, it's happening a lot more quickly than it used to, so now it's a matter of months. The third thing, or the next thing, I lost track of the numbers, decide what size of a family you can handle, because if you're just starting out, you've never done it before, you might want a small family, 2 or 4 people. But a lot of the Syrian families are extended. They have lots of children, and they have grandparents sometimes coming with them, so you need to take that into account. And then you start mobilizing your group and raising funds and so forth. I don't know if you want to go into the actual settlement part of that right now, or leave that.
Well, I think later. Just as long as people, I guess people need to know that when you do this, you're making a 12-month commitment to sort of wrap around with care for the
Mhm.
refugee family.
Yeah.
One
And
thing, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. Well, just to mention that for that first year, you really want to make sure the family gets settled. So you do all the practical things like getting an apartment, getting the kids in school, getting the parents into English classes if they need it, and most of them do. Just helping them to adjust to a new life and all. I mean, taking the bus, getting a library card, all the things, taking them grocery shopping. And so at the beginning, there's a lot of hands-on. But the idea is that throughout the year, you hope that the family can be encouraged to become more independent, and then by the end of the year, then they hopefully will be ready to launch and be on their own.
It's got to be pretty exciting to watch that happen.
Yeah, yeah, and frustrating sometimes.
Mhm.
I mean, every family is different, and some of them have a lot of needs, and some of them, it just things are really easy. Um, but there are often challenges,
Yeah.
but it's rewarding.
Mhm.
It's always worth it.
Yeah, I bet. Anita, let me ask you, because I know the Middle East settlement initiative that the EFC is involved with is a source for churches to turn to find a sponsorship agreement holder, I think. Can you tell us sort of why the EFC got involved with this and what role it is playing?
Sure. Primarily, it came from a mandate that we have as an organization, which is to welcome the stranger and out of an expression of love for God, to love our neighbors and also those that are especially vulnerable. And so we can see easily in the news, I mean, just watching the crossings in the Mediterranean and the little boy on the beach, you know, these people are vulnerable and they have ISIS at their back, and you know they're coming to countries that they're hoping for a welcome from. And so I'm very proud that we are in a country like Canada where we do welcome, and we are making plans to um, rescue some of those. EFC has currently a website that is available that lists the denominations that are participating in this initiative. You can find it under the Refugee Initiative on our, I believe it's the top banner under Initiatives. And you can locate your denomination as well as a list of organizations, should your denomination not be listed there, that will be able to help you locate a sponsorship agreement holder.
Okay, great. Now, Doug, you have been involved in this with your church actually sponsoring refugees. I know you're doing it again now. What how would you encourage a church to start being involved in this, and why?
Well, it's a very good question as to why we would do this. The nature of the church is really to look at where God is working and go there, whether it's in a local community, in your own neighborhood, or whether it's overseas. And I think the vast acceleration we've seen over the last 10 years in churches even getting involved in short-term missions signals a real desire to get involved in global issues where God is working. And churches are spending literally thousands of dollars sending people overseas to help. It's our biblical mandate to do so. So it's not just awareness of our own people and what God is doing overseas, but this deep yearning to help and to minister, which is who we are. So that global reality, that local and global reality, is coming to fruition in a new and fresh way. And God seems to be doing something extraordinary in this. We don't understand what all is going on when refugees get spilled over the borders. These are historical realities that go back generations. We're experiencing it now. We have the opportunity, and a lot of our denominations have boots on the ground in all these areas, doing excellent work and crying out for help, practical help, both financial, but also at this end to harbor people who just cannot live in those regions. The church is uniquely qualified, and I think it's a God thing. I really do. So we're tapping into a deep human need. I think, as Anita said, when the little boy Alan Kurdi washed up on the beach, there was a huge outcry, and it wasn't just a Canadian outcry. It tugged at our human spirit, but I do believe that God works in very strange ways with strange occurrences. Thousands of pictures had already come up on the internet. Thousands of images have already been produced. But that picture seemed to galvanize something that broke our hearts.
Yeah.
And launched a massive movement. We've seen it all over the place. And people simply said to me, personally, we must do something.
Yeah.
But we can do something. And it's a matter of then studying, looking at it, framing ourselves. We've got the systems in place and working in partnership. The church is uniquely qualified. And I think the last thing I would say is corporate compassion is something that the church embraces, and God creates a community for a purpose. We're not just individuals out there fighting wars, wars of the Holy Spirit on the ground. We're there as a corporate reality, feeding one another, feeding by the Spirit, trying to understand what God is doing. And as we do so, the community is active. God is in this.
Doug, let me ask you about pushback, or people maybe out of fear or concern asking tough questions about, well, should we be bringing Syrian refugees into Canada? There is some fear, I think, happening. Have you been hearing that, and how would you respond?
Yes, and we certainly don't want to go ballistic on this, given what is going on and some of the negativity we're seeing in the press and the media. Some of our friends south of the border are struggling with this horribly because of some intractable issues that they're facing. I think as more and more people actually hit our shores, and as people start landing, we're going to see more and more negativity. I don't see why we wouldn't. There's going to be a natural backlash as we try and cope with this. Our previous generation in Canada has seen waves of immigrants. This is our history. This is who we are. This is nothing new. Canada was built on immigration and refugees, and we stand in that tradition and stand with it strongly. I think that personally, when we deal with this in our own congregation and my own friends, some people have genuine fears. They need to be recognized. Genuine fears that they're not hollow and they're not to be derided. I think my stance has been to meet with people one-on-one, chat with them, tell me about how you're feeling about this. Half the time, facts help immensely. The actual facts of who's coming, what the situation is, clarifying who we as a church are, and trying to clarify some of the theological reasons. So we can't become incendiary with those that disagree with us. I think we have to really recognize that. And others, some people don't.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
But please, for those who really want to embrace it as a possibility for ministry.
Yeah.
Karen, may I just add
Please,
to that?
go ahead,
yeah,
Heather.
I think, Doug hit on some good points, and I think the people who are pushing back are doing it out of fear. And they're doing it out of fear because they don't know. And so I think that there is a lot of education to be done, and it has to be done carefully and compassionately. And because there's so much misinformation on the internet, especially, and people get these weird ideas about what's really going on. So it's good to educate ourselves and then be able to educate others who have a misunderstanding of the whole situation.
Yeah, one thing well, I'll tell you briefly, in my town of Fort Perry, we put together an inter-church group, so we have 5 congregations working together we're trying to bring 2 Syrian refugee families, and we heard some pushback from people in our town about the issue of, helping globally when there's problems locally, and also just about, but I think beneath it was a fear of the Syrian refugees in general, and just good information that is available about, statistically, refugees do not typically commit crimes in Canada. Like, there's not a record of that. There is good information to help people with their legitimate concerns. So we're going to turn to the questions now. We see some coming in, and Deborah, this is in reference to the blended visa question and the sort of accelerated timeline. A participant is asking, can the accelerated timeline apply to Iranian refugees as well? My church is trying to sponsor an Iranian refugee family currently in Cyprus.
The problem is that the government chooses who is going to be on that BVOR list. And I don't know how they choose it, but if you know of a family, an Iranian family in Cyprus, unfortunately there's no way to get them onto that BVOR list. So you have to go with the full private sponsorship, which unfortunately is going to take more time.
Okay. Now, what I heard about the blended visa office referred program, I'm probably not saying it right, and you can correct me, is that they are families who have indicated to the government, we need more help. We want that 12 months of wraparound support, and sort of indicated that.
Yeah, and in some cases they have special needs. They might have special health needs. We have a couple of families arriving this week where the head of the family is either in a wheelchair or has other mobility issues. I mean, and let's face it, they've been through a war, so some of them have trauma issues that need to be addressed. Others need help settling because they don't have a lot of life skills. Some families we're sponsoring don't have literacy, for example. So families like this need extra care. Some of them are large families and just can do with an extra bit of help in getting them settled and so forth.
Doug, your church is now actively fundraising. What is your goal? Are you trying to bring one family, or what are you trying to do there in Ottawa?
The way we handle it at the church I serve is we had a general meeting where we asked people to come and just learn about Syria and what was going on. That was really helpful. We had hundreds who came, actually.
Wow.
And that was a good thing, just to air the issues and to get them on the table so that people could speak their minds. And we had a second meeting really briefly where those who were really core people would come and commit themselves. And we had about 70 or 80 people come up to that. And we talked about the skills they had and the things they could offer. And then we formed a group of 5 at the core that would sort of drive the issue. And it worked out in a really practical and healthy way. We are a constituent group under a SAW group. So our office in Toronto is hopefully going to match us up soon with a BVOR family. That's our goal. Things are a little slow on that list, but we're still praying and doing that. As far as fundraising are concerned, we did a fundraising evening, ironically the night of the Grey Cup, which was really bright on our part. And we asked people to just be generous. I will tell you, without giving you a number, that the number that came in was substantial, enough to more than sponsor probably 2 families. We're looking at that. We're beginning with 1 family. Fundraising, we never believed was an issue. For those that were core and really sold on the issue and really wanted to do it, they were prepared to give generously, and their friends were prepared to give generously. Some talked to their work environments who have no way of doing this, so that they are pitching in to help out, and they're part of our team now, raising funds, and we're keeping them in touch with what's going on. Someone called me yesterday and offered a house that they've just moved out of and said, look, we want to offer this to you. We don't know if it'll work. We don't know if it's good, but they ran into one of our church people in a grocery counter. And that's how they found out about it. And we're just finding things like that all over the place. Once you start down the journey, people and their contacts begin to just enfold it, and things just begin to pour out that you would have never experienced. So money, in my estimation, will not be the issue for most congregations who really want to embrace this. As they start talking to the people and challenging them and inviting friends in to help, we find that it's really working positively, and I imagine that most churches will have that as a reality.
Let me ask in there, because this is a question from our participant, how much you need to raise, and does it vary by region?
Can I jump in there?
Yes.
We follow a guideline. We're in Ontario, so we follow a guideline that is provided to us by the federal government, and it is very similar to what a family would receive on Ontario Works, which is welfare. So we try not to go too much above that amount, because once the year is over, if the family does have to go on social assistance, we don't want them to have to come down from a higher level of lifestyle and then readjust again to something else. So we feel it's better, and this is what I'm hearing from other SAWs and other groups, that it's better to provide on the low end, but I mean, give them everything they need, and so much of that is through donations of like in-kind donations, so the startup costs usually aren't too great.
I think the number is 27,000 for an average family of 4, isn't it, Deborah?
4, yes.
Yeah, and then it ratchets up a little bit more for each additional person, so that's a target.
And that $27,000, if it's a BVOR, you only have to raise half that much.
That's correct. That's correct.
And just to remind people, because if you do get involved in this, you will learn a whole new set of acronyms. So BVOR is the Blended Visa Office Referred Program. And when we say SAW, we're talking about a sponsorship agreement holder. And a constituent group is what you become when you get connected with a sponsorship agreement holder, who is your umbrella as you go through this refugee sponsorship process. So an excellent follow-up question from our participant is, what happens after the year commitment is up if they're not self-sufficient? And you've partially answered that, Deborah, I think, when we talked about Ontario Works. But have you seen that happen, and what does happen?
I have seen it happen, and I'm working with a young family now who are just approaching their 1-year anniversary next week, and they won't be self-sufficient for the main reason that their English isn't as improved as it could be. They came with no English, so often the sponsoring group will encourage the adults to continue with studying English for some time and get that under their belt before they really start searching for a job. I know the young man would really, really like to work, and we're hoping that he can get some. I mean, he is doing some part-time work, but the reality is that if English is a big challenge, then it's better to get that down, and then they can get a better job, because so many jobs require you to have some language. And as far as the other kind of support, once the year is over, you're usually friends with them, so you will continue to offer them moral support and encouragement, and just become part of their lives, and they become part of your lives.
Yeah. I'll just add something to that. When we did our fundraiser, we had a young woman come who was a refugee from Vietnam, came over with the boat people. And this is 40 years ago now. She's a young woman, married with 2 kids, living right in our community, become a friend of hers over the years. And she came and spoke about her experience. She was about a year old when she arrived. Older brothers and sisters. One of those typical, very difficult story coming from Vietnam. They ended up in Bertel, Manitoba. Now, I'm a Winnipegger, and Bertel, Manitoba is a long way from a major center. And she spoke very eloquently about how the church there embraced them so well. They ended up setting up a Greek restaurant in another little town outside, and eventually ended up in Calgary, down the road. It was the most poignant story of a family in a very similar situation than we would experience with the Syrian refugee crisis. Just her embracing of everything that the church did, speaking about it so openly, so warmly, and no matter where they ended up in Canada, this was her point, it seemed that God had prepared a place for them.
Wow.
And they embraced the faith. That was their particular experience. But her point was, God goes before them. So that all the things that took place, wherever they ended, Bertel, Manitoba, I've been there. It's not a big town. You come right from Vietnam and you land there in the winter. This is going to be our experience here in Canada, but we genuinely believe our church. I mean, one thing we've said, and one thing our committee has said is, is that whoever the Lord brings to us, whether they be Christian, Muslim, or whatever, his purposes will be fulfilled, and he will be in this, and we're open to that. So question marks about should it be this kind of family or that kind of family, or what fears that arise have been seriously deflected by a deep scriptural understanding that God is in this and he is faithful. And it's all through the Old Testament.
Yeah.
People, the movements of people, we shouldn't see this as any different than the movement of God's people. What God is doing in this, I frankly, is a mystery. It's a mystery to those on the ground in Lebanon who are dealing with this on the border of Lebanon, struggling with just supporting people in those horrible situations, doing everything they can, being completely overwhelmed. And they believe, and I've spent time with them in Lebanon, they believe that God has asked them to step out and to just minister to those who he brings to them, without asking any questions, with the capacity that he gives them. And I think we're in the same boat, and we are so blessed here.
Thank you, Doug. And actually, speaking of someone working on the ground, we have a participant with us today in Turkey who is working with a feeding program to refugees. And their question is that they have refugees asking them about sponsorship to Canada. Where should I point them to? I've never gotten a good answer. So can we give this person a good answer today? Does anybody know? And maybe this is a question that we need to have that participant email us, and we can look into that a little bit.
Have the people registered with the UNHCR? I would want to check that. And further than that, if your contact in Turkey can be in touch with a sponsorship agreement holder in Canada and see if there can be a match-up there. I'm sure there are lots of refugees, though, that will want that assistance, and it's complicated, but
the UNHCR makes perfect sense. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees, obviously, we're speaking of. Someone else is asking, too, this is a great question. Aside from direct private sponsorship, are there ways for churches to help government-sponsored refugees? And of course, we're going to be seeing 25,000 of those arrive in Canada in the next probably 6 months or so. And if so, how? That is a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I live in Kingston. We have a Canadian Forces base here, so we expect to be receiving government-assisted refugees in January. And so far, it's still a bit of a mystery. Even the people at the base don't know quite what will be happening, but I think in cities where they have refugee assistance programs, which is RAP, then those programs can coordinate volunteers. So, but it's still, there's so much unknown, but there are ways. In our town, people are being directed through the United Way. If they want to volunteer, they should sign up through the United Way, and the United Way will forward their offers for helping.
Okay, that's great. Doug?
I do have some thoughts on that. We are working with as many politicians as we can here to get some clarification on this. This is the big issue that's coming down. It's the downstream issue. If they're bringing in 25,000 by February, the word is they're going to bring another 25,000 in by the end of the year. That's potentially 50,000 refugees. That is not going to make things any easier. No. And the government even now is having trouble explaining exactly where those folks are going to go, how they're going to land, what cities get them. They're still playing that out. It's sort of an on-time delivery. What is going on? I think in a month or two we are going to know a lot more about practical ways that churches and other groups can help with the government's particular issue of bringing those people in. They're banking on the private sector to help them. Yeah. But practical reasons on practical ways to do it is still a little foggy. I will predict that they're going to need a lot of help. And we're trying to speak to some government officials about, here we are available to help. Can you begin to identify for us where the best place for that is? Whether they have any fear about Christian churches intervening in this, is an issue that we will certainly be addressing, because every denominational leader I've spoken to, and we brought many of them to Ottawa, have said categorically that this is not an issue of Christianizing and evangelizing, that's not the primary motive. It's helping those who are most disadvantaged. We'll leave the rest to the Holy Spirit as to what takes place. But the practical area you're asking about, Karen, is I think going to explode on us not too far into the next year. The government's going to have to work with partners, and they haven't even landed yet. They're still trying to get them on planes. They're feverishly working to work out the logistics when they arrive. They don't want them in barracks for long. That would be a tragedy, because that would feel and look just like they've left in Beirut or wherever they're coming from.
Yeah,
so that they want to immediately push them into the communities. They're going to need help from people, and that includes the churches, because we're already in place with facilities and with help and resources that are available. So
Anita,
sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Anita, will the EFC be like an organizing partner with that kind of initiative, with churches wanting to help the government? And also, we have a participant asking a question you can tag on. Are we working with any churches in the U.S.?
Our role is a facilitator, not as much as organizing the specifics. What we encourage people to do is to contact their denomination or one of the listed organizations that are on the website. But in the days to come, I'm sure we're going to be gathering available resources, available places where we can send people if they're looking for specific helps. One of the things that I wanted to stress, and I know we're seeing it here in Ottawa under Refugee 613, I got that right, is that the church is uniquely positioned to be able to provide in the local community intergenerational, intercultural. Members are adherents from all walks of life, and particularly with different skill sets. There might be a doctor or a dentist or somebody in your congregation that perhaps works in an area that would be useful and helpful to the refugees. You have to think very creatively about how you might meet the needs of that family or that individual. And so those are going to be, it's going to be a creative thinking, but yes, I'm hoping that there's also going to be some more structured, available resources that in time, as we know what is needed, we'll be able to direct people in that way. I would again encourage them to contact their denominations as we go, and again, the other organizations that are offering services beyond that. As far as partnering with the U.S., I'm not aware at this point of direct connection other than WEA has also launched an initiative, maybe not as coordinated as this, but I think they might be a good contact in the States.
Yeah,
let me just say the WEA is the World Evangelical Alliance.
Thanks,
Go ahead, Doug.
I'm sure there are some private discussions going on with people in the States, but at this point it's a political quagmire, and until some things get sorted, Canada is really taking a lead on this and sticking their necks out. I've talked to many American friends who actually have asked to help us here in Canada.
Oh, interesting.
Some way, because there's no real facility to do that where they are, either through their denomination, church, or any organization. There's just so much negativity. I think that's going to increase and get really, really awful. We're just seeing some of the worst of history repeat itself, and we have to be very careful that we measure our response here and do it in some just really creative ways. I really appreciate what CTV and CBC has done in going in and just interviewing families in those regions. I think that was a wonderful thing to just see them in their local context and what they're facing. That was a very important thing for us with the media.
Yeah. Yeah.
May I point out? Yeah, that's my phone. Sorry, I'm going to talk over it. May I just point out that Canada is unique in the world because we are the only country that has the private sponsorship of refugees. No other country has that. So we're the only place where organizations and individuals can sponsor refugees. So with the U.S. and other countries, they're talking about government-assisted ones where people can help them once they arrive, but they are not sponsored in the same way as ours are.
Yeah, that's a very good point. A participant has made a comment that they're seeing real openness from their local resettlement agency to working with churches. So that's very encouraging to hear. And I will also share in our journey in Port Perry, where I live, getting organized with this, we were amazed once we started to scratch the surface at how much assistance is out there already to help new Canadians. And we're in a relatively small town, but within a stone's throw to cities. And just very quickly, we had a lot of our anxiety taken care of about things like English as a second language and employment resettlement and so on. Very, very helpful. So that was all really a relief to see that. We have another question, which is an excellent one. Does the constituent group give the money directly to the refugees or manage the finances for them? That's a very good rubber hits the road question.
Yeah, I find that different constituent groups do it differently. What we have done is kind of give them a paycheck, but work with them at the beginning in budgeting and explain how much is needed for rent and telephone and utilities and groceries and all that kind of stuff, and just sort of guide them through it. Some other groups will take the money and pay the rent and pay the utilities and so forth, and then kind of give out allowances. I think it depends on the family. It depends what kind of circumstances they've come from, because if they've been in a camp for many years, they might not know what it's like to have an income. If they are more recent refugees, as most of the Syrians are, they may have left a good life and know how to manage finances. So it's important to be careful and not treat them in any way condescendingly, but respect their ability to be autonomous people.
Let me throw out the name of the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, and that's an agency that you can quickly find them online. We have called them several times and had a speaker come out to Port Perry and speak to our group. They can answer so many questions. So that has been, again, I just want to reassure people from my own experience, we are not reinventing the wheel. Lots of people have done this before, and there's huge amounts of support out there for groups wanting to sponsor refugees. Another question is, do you have to select a country from which to sponsor a family? And this is, I think this is connected to the blended visa question, because they're asking also what the title of that was. So Deborah, I think you're the blended visa expert here. Maybe you can respond to that.
Yeah, what happens, you actually select a specific family because the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, which Karen just mentioned, RSTP, they work closely with the federal government. So when the matching center of the government has lists of refugees that they have cleared for sponsorship, they send it to RSTP. RSTP sends it on to the sponsorship agreement holders. So we look at that list and we'll see there's a Syrian family of 4 or 6 or 13, and we show it to our constituent groups and they say, okay, we can handle a family of 4 but not 13, and so they choose it that way. And the lists also are broken down according to country. So it'll have refugees from Iran, refugees from Congo, refugees from Myanmar, refugees from Eritrea, and right now they're lumping the Syrian ones separately from that.
Okay, thank you. Doug and Anita, let me give you this question from another participant, and I'm curious about this one too. I never quite understood the difference. Is it better for my church to apply to sponsor a family as a constituent group or a community sponsor? It's only my church in the group. So here we have a church. Should they be a community group or a constituent group? Or does it matter?
Hands down, I think it would be a constituent group, because you then fall under a SAW program. If your church comes under the sponsorship agreement holder category, you're already pre-cleared as far as I understand it, to begin the process. It's much more difficult if you're a community or a group of five, or the official term, just a group that pulls itself together to begin the process. There are many denominations who aren't saw holders, but they're coming under different, other saw holders are inviting them in to be part of their group.
Okay.
That is going on right across the country, and has been wonderful to see that. So I would think at this point that most of the major denominations come under some kind of a SAW agreement. So that would be the route that I would go. It certainly clears the decks, and you're also hooked into now with people who have familiarity with the documentation and with the system and everything else.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Yeah, that would be my answer.
That's great, and that is what we did. And I'm sharing that because we're maybe 4 weeks ahead of someone in this group who's just learning about this for the first time. We became a constituent group, and that's 5 churches actually in Port Perry and their congregations, and we intentionally went beyond church world and invited in community members who were excited to be invited in. So there's something very cool happening there. Anyway, we went to the sponsorship agreement holder list on the Canadian government website, and we chose one that we felt, sort of connected to, and I got advice actually from Deborah, and we called up and asked. It was as simple as that. And they agreed to take us on as a constituent group, gave us the paperwork. We're in the process of finalizing that. So at the beginning, it feels very complicated and kind of frightening because it's a whole new world. But once you start taking steps forward, you realize it's, again, it's been done thousands of times before, and people are wanting to help you do this well. So I'm sorry, a group has, another question has come in, supporting existing ministries in, say, Turkey. Okay, so that is a great question. Like, there are other ways we discussed earlier to help with this situation. There are groups, Doug, you mentioned on the front line at refugee camps. So there are other ways to help, of course, and give to this.
Yeah, World Vision is involved in this. A lot of denominations have work in Jordan and Lebanon. They're already on the ground working through their churches there. There are the Canadian Food Grains Bank, I believe, has some connections with this, with different denominations and helping out. I know that's going on in Lebanon. So there's funds. This should be mentioned. The government set aside funds for on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground help over in these areas. Winter's approaching, heaters are needed, blankets are needed, tents are needed. Those funds are going over there. The Liberal government has said, we want to do that. You can give, for instance, in our denomination, you can give through our own denomination 2 churches and funds over in Lebanon.
Okay.
That money's going straight to buying those kind of resources to help out. School books, churches are driving educational initiatives. There's all kinds of things. So both at this end and at that end, there is help available, and people can give either way. They can give on this end by receiving a family. They can give on the other end by giving substantial funds to help out on the ground through a recognized organization that they can trust, knowing that the money is going to get to where it needs to get to.
Yeah.
Also, Doug, I believe until the end of December, people giving through these recognized organizations for help on the ground, they will be matched by government funding.
I understand that's right, yes.
Yeah.
So a great time to give them. Someone is asking, a participant is asking, how long does it take to set up a SAW? I'm believing they mean how long does it take to set up, as a constituent group under a sponsorship agreement holder. And I'll answer first because we're in the middle of that it sort of happens as quickly as you can put together your application. Part of that is writing a settlement plan and indicating that you understand the work involved and that you know what resources are out there, and then getting your funding in place. So I don't know, Deborah, if you have anything to add to that.
No, setting up a constituent group doesn't take very long. You just get a few people together, and then you start thinking about all the things that are needed, and you can expand from there. So it's a process, but the initial setup isn't very long.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm certainly encouraged by the sort of energy of the questions we're fielding, and I hope our experts are too. There's clearly a great interest in this, being involved in this type of ministry, and it's such an open door for us to be involved to help. Anita, do you have any final comments to encourage us from that very big picture view that you have with the EFC?
I think just echoing what you just said, I was just at a conference in Hamilton for the Refugee Highway Partnership last week, and there just is such a great response from Canadians, what we're hearing, and in comparison, I know so many of us often are caught watching CNN and we hear the negative end of things, but the response of compassion from Canadians makes me extremely proud to be part of this country, and glad to be working with all the various denominations and even the government folks that we run into. Just the hearts to want to help and the hearts to want to rescue, I think, is just such an incredible thing to be part of.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and I mean, again, this is just from my personal experience. The other day I was baking for a bake sale for my daughter in her high school group that's helping with this. And I felt really moved, thinking, I don't know the family that will come, but somewhere there's a family who's going to end up, in our lives, and hopefully we'll make friends, and that's okay if we don't either, but we're going to be a part of helping get them out of a terrible, terrible situation and into our wonderful country. So it really is, personally, it's a great experience, but also just knowing that you're helping someone. Doug, do you have a final word?
Yeah, this isn't an add-on for the church. This is at the core of who we are. It's at the very core. We have all kinds of missions going on in our own communities. We have short-term missions going everywhere. I think it's just an outgrowth of our love and our care and our biblical mandate, but it's an opportunity for us. One thing the government has stated very clearly, and I keep hearing this is not a government issue. This is a Canadian issue. This is not a government initiative. This is a Canadian initiative. The government and all those involved are going to need the church down. This is a long-term thing. To think it ends in February would be crazy. Once some of the bloom is off the rose, you're into the long term here, bringing even another 25,000 in. The church is going to become a very prominent player in this. We just have to embrace that. We have to step up to the plate and be available. I think we have just a natural community embracing of things such as this. We're uniquely positioned. So that's not a crass comment. It's just this is who we are. We're in it for the long term.
Yeah, very good.
For the long term.
Yeah, thank you. And again, just to encourage people that we're in for the long term, but we're not in it alone. There's lots of people who know what they're doing here, and Deborah, you're one of them. So I'm going to give you the last question to answer, and then a final word from you, and then I'll wrap us up. So I think it's an easy one. What language do the Syrian refugees primarily speak?
Arabic.
Okay.
Some of them will speak English, but Arabic is the main language that they will speak.
Very good. All right. Any encouragement you would offer, Deborah, to someone?
Well, just that very word. Be encouraged. Don't be afraid. It's a huge risk, a huge challenge, but it is so worth it. And as Karen said, there's so much help out there, so many resources. So follow your heart and follow what God is telling you to do, and be encouraged.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, Anita. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Deborah. It was great to have you with us today, and thank you to the participants. We will be archiving this webinar, so you can view it. You can pass it on to friends who you want to get excited about this. You would go to evangelicalfellowship.ca/webinars. You can email us at efc@efc.ca. If you have follow-up questions that we haven't dealt with, we want to help you. And as a thank you for participating today, you have access to a special subscription deal to Faith Today, the magazine we publish, which is you can find at faithtoday.ca/webinar. You can subscribe for half price. And if you would like to email us also, we could send you the issue of the magazine for free that features Deborah's very practical story, how-to article on how your church can sponsor refugees. So we will wrap up for now. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you are moved to get involved in this issue in a more practical, direct way because of the webinar, we'd love to hear from you. That would be a real encouragement to us. So thank you and have a great day.